Hey Seven, so here those video solutions I talked about are. I'll just go through the test with you guys. I'll try and make it sort of quick. Remember, you can pause it and stop it anytime you want, or rewind it and go back over something if you need to, okay? So let's take a look. Here we've got the test. Just wanted to point out the notes up here, okay? So make sure you read those before you start the test. Okay, that's why they're up the top. There's just a few things to prompt your memory, okay? So you might not remember every single thing we've done in math at any single point in time. So those notes are here for you to check before you go on with the test, okay? So first question, insert the less than, greater than or equal symbol to make the number statement true. Hint, convert to proper fractions first. Okay, so we've got 10/8, so that's 10 over 8. Okay, so 10 lots of 8s. Now, we want to convert that to a proper fraction. Okay, so currently it's an improper fraction. All right, so how many times does 8 go into 10? Well, that goes once with 2 remainder, and we're dividing by 8. Okay. So 1 and 2/8. Well, let's take a look at this, this second part here. We can simplify that further. Okay, so we could say, well, that is 1 1/4. Okay, now let's look at 5 quarters. Let's look at this second part. So we've got 5 quarters. Okay, so 5 lots of a quarter. Now, as a proper fraction, well, 4 goes into 5 once, with 1 remainder, and we're dividing by 4. So as you can see, these two things, well, they're equal. Okay, so we need to put an equal sign in there. Now, actually, I'll wait for a second. We'll go over the less than or greater than symbols shortly. Okay, $100 in winnings need to be split between 7 children. How much will each child receive? To the nearest cent, and we need to round to 2 decimal places, okay? And that's because we're dealing with money, and we can round money to 2 decimal places for the nearest cent. All right, so I've got to split 100 into 7. How am I going to do that? All right, well, remember you do have access to a calculator in your test, so let's go 100, and I want to split that up into 7 groups. I'm going to divide that by 7. Okay, now this gives me 100 over 7. Well, yeah, I already know that. I want to know what it is as a decimal. Okay, so I press that SD button down there, and we get 1428571429. So let's write that down. Okay, so we've got 100 divided by 7 equals $14.271429. Okay, now this was testing how well you learnt rounding. Okay, so we've got to round to 2 decimal places. So here's my first decimal place, and here's my second decimal place, and here's my third, my fourth, and so on. Okay, we want to round to 2, so we're putting a line after the 2. Now, when we're rounding, we have to check that one there. Okay, so the one after the place we're rounding to. Okay, so if this is greater than or equal to 5, then I have to round up. Okay, and this one is greater than or equal to 5, so we've got to add 1 to this column here. Okay, so I've got 14.28, and I've got to add 1 to this column here. Now, this one's nice and easy. Sometimes you might have a 9 and you'll have to do a few other things, but this one's nice and easy. So we're adding 1 and we get, well, 8 and 1 is 9, and we're just copying these ones down. Okay, so my final answer, $14.29. Okay, so next question. 1,000 out of 2,700 calories in a person's diet come from carbohydrate. Write this as a fraction, decimal, and percentage. Okay, so let's do our fraction. We've got 1,000, so that's the part out of the whole, and the whole is 2,700. Okay, now we can cancel these zeros off. Right, so that gets us 10 out of 27. Can we simplify that any further? I don't think we can. So that's our fraction answer. So here's our fraction. All right, now what about if I want to change that to a decimal? Okay, so remember, you have your calculator. Let's bring that calculator back in. Type in my fraction. So I want to go fraction key. I've got 10 over, excuse my voice, 27 equals 10 over 27. I know that calculator. I want it as a decimal, so I'm going to press my SD button. Okay, so here's our decimal answer. All right, so let's write that down. Decimal. Now I've made it disappear. Hang on a sec. Okay, so my decimal is 0.37. 0.37. 0.4. Okay, now you could have written all those decimals down. You could have written it to 2 decimal places. As long as you tell me how many decimal places you're rounding to, I'm happy to accept your answer. Okay, so for the next part, so we want to do that as a percentage now. Okay, now if I want to go from a decimal, or a fraction for that matter, to a percentage, I need to times by 100. So let's bring our calculator back in. Times by 100. Whoops, not 1,000, just 100. So, as you would all know, that's just moving, timesing by 100 is just moving our decimal place 2 spots. 1, 2, to the right. Okay, if it was dividing by 100, we'd be going left, but this time it's going right. So our percentage answer is going to be 37.037. Now the next one's 0, so I'm just going to leave it at 3 decimal places. Okay, so percent. All right, let's keep going. So here's a little thing to help you remember when I was talking about the greater than or less than symbol. We've got this alligator here now. Gators eat what's greater is the little saying. Okay, so the alligator is going to eat the 8 because it's greater than the 3. Now another way to think about it is if we look at the distance between this and the distance between here, we can see the greater number, or the greater side of the symbol is over here. Okay, now let's have a look at a few examples. So we've got 8 and 4, 2 and 6, 3 and 3. Okay, well 8 is greater than 4. 2 is less than 6, and 3 is equal to 3. Now let's take a look at those gaps. So here, the bigger gap is on the bigger number. The bigger gap is on the bigger number. And these guys, well, it's the same size. Okay, and that's also telling you that these ones are equal. Okay, so if you're getting confused about the less than or the greater than side and struggling to remember which way it goes, there's a couple of tips for you. So gators eat what's greater, or you can look at the size of the gap. Okay, let's keep going. So Mr. Wilson likes his cordial weak. He only wants 5% syrup. If he's making a litre, how much syrup will he need? Well, you had to remember that 1 litre is 1,000 milliliters. Okay, and we didn't have to remember that, but that can make this question a little simpler. So we want to find 5% of that. Okay, so I want to find 5% of 1,000. All right, now you guys would be able to tell me that a percentage is a fraction out of 100. Okay, and you would also hopefully be able to tell me that of is times. If I said what's 5 lots of 6, hopefully you would do 5 times 6. Okay, so why I'm talking about that is, well, we can translate this into a problem for our calculator. Okay, so we're going to use 5%, well that's 5 out of 100. Oops. Of is times, and we're doing that for 1,000. Okay, so 50. 50 is my answer. Okay, so equals 50. Now, another way, and what we'll talk about the other way on this bottom one. We'll do the bottom one down here in our head. Okay, we've used our calculator. We'll also use our head because we want to be able to do that too. So, next question. Toad received 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10. Mole received 19 out of 25. Now, obviously, they're two different tests, okay, and that's why we're going to use percentages to compare the performance on these tests, okay, because we can't just look at the marks. You know, there's no way Toad could have gotten as many marks as Mole because his test was only out of 10. So that's why we're going to use percentages. All right, so how do I do that? Well, 7 out of 10, well, hopefully you remember, but if not, we can use our calculator. 7 out of 10, what is that as a percentage? Well, let's do it. 7 out of 10 equals, as a decimal, that's 0.7, okay? And I want to times that by 100. Sorry, I just got to get my calculator back up. I want to times that by 100 to turn that into a percentage. Okay, and that gives me 70. Now, Mole, 19 out of 25. Let's do that. 19 out of 25. 0.76. So that one is 0.76. And if you times that by 100, you would get 76%. Okay, so who has performed better on that test? Well, we can see that Mole has a higher percentage. Okay, so Mole better mark. Okay, so Mole got the better mark there, and we did that by changing those scores to percentages. All right, let's do this last one in our head. So Farmer John needs a new pair of boots and sees some he likes for 20% off. They originally cost $220. What will their discounted price be? Okay, so we've got to take away 20%. All right, so let's talk about, we've got $220. Okay, what would 10% be? 10%. Well, 10% is the same as dividing by 10. So if I've got 220 and I divide by 10, that's moving the decimal place one spot to the left. Okay, so 10% equals 22. Well, if I know 10% is 22, couldn't I just double it to figure out what 20% is? Okay, if I'm timesing this side by 2, I could times that side by 2 as well. Okay, and we'll get into that later this term with our algebra. So 20% equals 44. All right, so I know what 20% is. That's the discount. Okay, so $44 is the discount. So we've got 220, and the shop owner is taking 20% or $44 off, which gives a new discounted price of $176. Okay, so a couple more. Let's keep going. Lake Agelago has a capacity of 120 gigalitres, but is only 40% full. How many gigalitres of water would it need to be full again? All right, so it has a capacity of 120 gigalitres, but it's only 40% full. Well, how much water is in it now? Okay, so let's figure that out. Well, 40% of 120. Let's use our calculator. So 40% is so that's 40 out of 100. That's what a percentage is, a fraction out of 100. Times 120. 48. Okay, so it has 48. I'm not sure if it's a capital G or not. Gigalitres. Okay, so how many does it need to be full again? How many does it need to get back up to 120? Okay, so to do that, well, let's find the difference between those two numbers. Okay, so 120 take away 48 gives me 72. So it needs 72 gigaliters or 72 billion liters to be 100% full again. Okay? So another way to do that question is, well, if it's 40% full, it needs 60% to get back to 100%. Okay, so if we add 60%, that takes us back up to 100%. So another way to do that would have been, well, what is 60% of 120? And if you did that on your calculator, you'd also find that that's 72. Okay, so there's more than one way to do these things. Arrange the following in descending order. So what does descending mean? Okay, that means you're going from the highest to the lowest. Okay, now for the purpose of this video solution, I'm going to change this. Okay, so I'm going to say ascending. And that's just so I can do our number line down here. So we've got -1, here's 0, here's 1, and here's 2. Now these are positive numbers. Okay, so what is our lowest number here out of these numbers? Well, I think it's going to be -1/2. -1/2. And circle that. I might highlight it actually. So here's our first one. All right, now, next one, -0.4. So we've done that one. -0.4 is our next one. So as we're heading up, so we're ascending for this video. As we're heading up, -0.4 is going to be our next one. And that will be roughly here. So -0.4. Okay, so that one's done. There's our next one. Okay, next one. I think is going to be 1/4. Okay, so 1/4 of the way between 0 and 1 is going to be roughly there. So 1/4. What's my next one? All right, let's take a look at that list. I think it's going to be 5/8. Okay, now 5/8 is 0.625. All right, now if that's halfway, that's 0.5. We don't care about that one. We're looking at that disappeared for some reason. 0.625, so it's just past halfway, 0.625. Actually, I'll write it as it appears on the test. I'll write it as 5/8. Okay, so here's 5/8. Now you might be saying, well, how did he know that that's 0.625? Well, that's just something I've been able to remember, okay? And you will too over time, that's fine. But if you're not sure what a fraction is as a decimal, use your calculator, okay? So let's do 5/8 equals. I want it as a decimal, 0.625. Okay, so we type in our fraction, press equals, change it to a decimal. All right, and that's going to help you place those things on the number line. So next one. Next one is going to be 0.75. All right, oh, and we've done that one. So 0.75 is 3/4. Okay, so 0.75. Now, the calculator works both ways, okay? If you say we had to answer as a fraction for all of these, we could put 0.75 in, press equals, and your calculator will change that to a fraction for you. 0.75 is on there. 0.99 is going to be just before 1. Okay, so there's my next one. And my last one is the square root of 2. Now, if you didn't know where the square root of 2 went, like if you didn't know that it was going to be after 0.99, how could you figure that out? Well, you might have noticed what we've been doing is changing a lot of these back to a decimal. Okay, and we'll do the same here. So let's do square root of 2. Okay, that was that symbol there, in case you missed that symbol just under the cubed button. Okay, so square root of 2 equals, we want to change that to a decimal. So 1.4142135562. Now, but for the purpose of our little question here, we only really need to know the first 2 decimal places. So let's get our pen out and we'll change that to, well, that's 1.41. So here's 1.5. Okay, so it's going to be just before there, 1.41, or the square root of 2. Okay, so what have you done today? Well, we've been remembering. Okay, let's put a tick on that. Remembering. We've been planning, you've been revising. Hopefully you've been listening effectively. Hopefully you removed all your distractions before you attempted this video. Okay, this is a big one for me, guys, and this is what you should be really proud of. Okay, you have taken the responsibility to log on and watch this video and try and improve your math. So that's great. Okay, and that's that's being accountable. Okay. Questioning, well, you can't ask me any questions now, but if you do have questions about these videos or this video, come and see me. And capitalizing, you are taking advantage of the resources that I've given you. Okay, so thanks for your attention. Have another go. So remember, we want to try and get up to 80%. Okay, so in the email I sent you with the link to this video is the original test. Okay, you don't have to print it. You could just bring it up on your screen and have another go at it that way, and use this video or your original test to mark it and try and get up to 80%. Okay, good on you guys. See you in term 3.